Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. I want to talk about one of my books, the setting of one of my books, and that is Eyes in the Walls. This is a horror book I wrote. I actually began it on stream in a Halloween stream a couple of years ago and put it out in December of that year. It's a book I had a lot of fun writing and really enjoyed the process of creating. If you want to know what it's really about, it's about a boy who thinks there might be a monster living in the morgue where his mother works. His mother operates a funeral home, and he thinks there might be a monster living down where the bodies are. So that's the setup. Now you'll have to read to find out whether there really is a monster or just what is going on in Eyes in the Walls. But the setting of Eyes in the Walls to me is very important, and it's important for a couple of reasons. Not just the place that it takes, obviously it takes place in a funeral home for a large part of it, but also the urban setting and the time that it takes place. Now, I don't mention the date in this book, and I don't mention the name of the city in this book. That's kind of by intention because a lot of these experiences are kind of true regardless of where you grew up. If you were in a city at this time, a lot of the city life felt the same. So some astute readers have started to figure out, or had figured out when this was released at least, where it actually took place. And if you want to know the answer, it actually takes place in Los Angeles. And I give a couple clues to that throughout the book. And one of the big ones is a specific Dunkin' Donuts where they get picked up on a couple of corner streets. And I think I give the names of those streets. And it's a Dunkin' Donuts that's in LA. It's in downtown LA by the main character's dad's apartment. And so it's a very, you can figure out like what apartment he maybe lived in, but it's a very specific Dunkin' Donuts. I think it's one I've actually eaten at down in LA. So yes, it takes place in LA, but it really could be in any city because every city has these things. There's like the more downtown area with high rises, and there's more outskirts kinds of areas. Of course, there's going to be funeral homes and things like that. There's a lot of things that are going to be common regardless of the city. Now, the other important thing was the time, and I don't mention what year this takes place in, but it's really between 1990 and 1991. Okay, in 1990 and 1991 are important years for a couple of reasons. So, it's a Gen Y year. Now, if you don't know what Generation Y is, it's what we were referred to before, I guess, about the year 2000 when they started calling like everyone born after 1990 millennials, and now people have this hard time like, is he Generation X, is he Generation Y? It's kids born from the late 70s to the late 80s. In fact, I will link to you, there's a free collection edited by J.D. Cowan, which you can read down below. You can just click, it's a mega link, and you can read the book. It's got essays by me, Brian Niemeyer, and J.D., kind of a snapshot of this ongoing conversation we had about our generational cohort between 2020 and 2021, roughly, where I'd write an essay, I'd respond to one of Brian's, and there'd be another response. We write stories, so it's got stories and essays in it. And this really kind of fits into the Gen Y genre that I wrote a bunch of little stories in. It's just longer than the others. So 1990 to 1991 are important years because they are the childhood years of Gen Y, and this main character is an older sort of Gen Y character. He's kind of in middle school at this time. He has a Game Boy. There's a couple clues as to the year that it takes place in. He has a Game Boy. They're playing like Nintendo, so it's going to be late 80s, early 90s. The Game Boy came out in 1989, but none of us really had one until like 1990 or 1991. His dad gave it to him. The kids are still reading comics. So once we get too far past the early 90s, you start to have a couple of things happen. Kids stop reading comic books. Comic books were very popular throughout the 80s and were very popular in the early 90s, and then they kind of fell off a cliff by the late 90s. And they fell off a cliff for many reasons that I don't need to get into in this video. But suffice to say, if it was 1998, the kids would not be reading comic books. In fact, none of them would even own a single comic book, most likely, and they would never go into a comic store because there wouldn't be one near them, and they wouldn't be able to buy the comics at the store. In this story, they could still get the comics at the drugstore. When I was a kid, you go down to the drugstore, they had a spinner rack, you could buy the newest Spider-Man or something like that. The distribution model started to change in the 1990s, and that's really when the industry started falling off the cliff. Anyway, so they're reading comics, they're playing Nintendo games, that's early 90s. If you go too far past that, you start to get into the cell phone era and the internet era. So notice none of the characters in this book have access to the internet. There's computers around. Like we had computers in the early 90s. They just weren't very advanced. There's no like home web surfing kind of stuff. You're not clicking on your dial-up modem and checking out some kind of web page or something, or going onto a forum or chat room or using ICQ or something like that. All that's later 90s kind of stuff. And there's a couple of reasons why I wanted to avoid cell phones and internet. When you are writing horror, when you're writing in the horror genre, it starts to become difficult to maintain that sense of tension and isolation and real danger when everyone has a cell phone and the internet, right? When we were kids, my generation, when we were kids, a lot of us were latchkey kids. We were kind of turned loose. Our parents often didn't know where we were at. We could be out all afternoon. Pretty much if we came home before dinner, for most of us, we were good. And even if we came home after dinner, it was probably okay. We just had to be home before nightfall. Parents, we might call our parents and tell them where we were at, but they wouldn't have any way to get in contact with us. And if we all decided to meet somewhere, like we're all going to go meet at the mall, we're going to meet somewhere. If somebody didn't show up to that meeting, you just had to live with the mystery of why they didn't show up. It wasn't like, hey, Billy's not here. Let's give him a call. Hello, Billy. Why are you not at the Galleria right now? We all decided we'd go to the Galleria at 3 on Friday, and there's no Billy. And he'd be like, well, I forgot that I had to do something at home. I forgot that, this was happening. Okay, you're just like, Billy's not here. I wonder what happened. I guess we'll find out at school on Monday, or we'll never know, because people didn't have cell phones. Someone didn't show up to something. You just had to live with the mystery of why they didn't show up. That's just how it was. So that creates a lot more availability for isolation. And the children in this are very isolated. Their parents are very hands-off, and that's kind of an experience of my generation. Like I said, a lot of us were latchkey kids, and we're kind of turned on our own devices starting in middle school. Like I used to walk myself home from middle school, and my parents wouldn't be home, and I would watch TV or just avoid doing homework for a while, maybe play video games. Until they came home, or I'd go over to a friend's house. Like I'd go over to a friend's house after school. And definitely when I was in middle school, I used to go over to my friend Vince's house and we'd hang out. And then my mom would come pick me up so I didn't have to walk all the way home. And she liked that because, I was at someone's house and that sort of stuff. And she had a vague idea, if I need to get a hold of David, he might be at Vince's house. And I will call Vince's mom, call her house and see if he's there, and maybe he's there. Or maybe he went to Andrew's house, or maybe he went to someone else. Just that was the way things were. And even then, going into high school, people had cell phones, but most of the kids didn't have cell phones. So once you get into the cell phone era, it's harder to be isolated and alone. Those alone moments, like there's no one here to help us. There's no way for us to be contacted. Our parents don't know where we're at. That kind of stuff. It's not available for your storytelling. Cell phones change the way that you tell the story a lot. The other one is the internet. So an urban legend is part of this story. There's this urban legend of this kid who lives in the morgue, right? So they believe that this forgotten child lives in the morgue, this monstrous guy. Now, if you had the internet, you could just go look all this stuff up. In the internet, you could Google it. You could go search the records of who owned what where and who died when. There's not a lot of room for the urban legends because you could fact check everything. You could look up public records of, who owned this morgue before my mom. Oh, it turns out it was owned by this person and that person. And so you dispel the mystery and the wonder of what exactly happened. Wait, what did you hear? You heard that there's a weird guy who lives in the morgue. well, let me go check that on the internet. So once you have the availability and the ubiquitousness of the internet, then it's harder to write mysteries. So if you're writing something in the cell phone and internet era, so I specifically said it before the cell phone and internet era, and it communicates a lot about the feeling of being Generation Y at this time. This like kind of isolation, this disconnect from people and things, kind of a little bit of disconnect from parents and family, the love of being able to like read comics and play video games. There's a feeling that the main character expresses when he gets to his father's house or his father's apartment, and like, you know, there's a calmness to it. There's light coming in from the city. You know, all of those feelings are kind of diminished once you get into the modern age. But if you're going to set a story in the modern period, what you have to do is you have to take the person who's used to cell phones and you have to pull them to some other place, or some other time, but some other place where they no longer have that internet and that cell phone available. It has to be out in the woods. You know, you go put somebody out in the woods where there's like some sort of cryptid that they're afraid of. Now you can write a really tense horror story because you've removed them from the convenience and the safety of the always-on cell phone and the ability to fact-check everything and research things on the internet. You have to put them in a place where things don't work. Or you could write a horror story where all the cell phones go off. Or like Stephen King wrote one called Cell, where everyone who picked up their cell like went crazy and turned into a zombie. You know, those are fun setups for the modern world. But if you want that old school horror feeling, like if you like the horror movies from the 80s and the horror stories from the 70s and 80s, then you're probably going to have to set it a little bit further back in time. And so this is kind of a snapshot of what it was like to be a kid at that time, and reinforces a lot of the feelings of isolation that are important to telling this particular horror story. So anyway, you can check it out. Eyes in the Walls. I'm trying to remember, I think it's $2.99 for the ebook, and I mean, a little bit more for the paperback. There is, you know, a physical copy available, and I hope you will like it if you do check it out. I think the entire ebook is also available on the channel, or not the ebook, the entire audiobook is available on the channel if you want to hear me reading it. It gets like delayed on Amazon, so I'll try to get it up on Audible for your convenience in the future. But in the meantime, of course, you can read it now. Eyes in the Walls. Thanks so much, guys. Generation Y collection by J.D. Cowan will also be linked down below in the description if you are interested in more Gen Y kind of stuff. It closes with one of my favorite pieces. People call these like schizophrenia simulators because we're not sure what's true and like whether we're hallucinating. That's another one. It's called Middlebury, a Gen Y tale. It's one of my favorite pieces that I've written actually recently, and it's in the short story realm. It's about 10,000 words, I think. So anyway, check that out, and I will see you guys next time. Leaving your thoughts down below about some of these ideas about removing oneself from the modern safety conveniences and how that can enhance the story. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.